when they want it, how they want it. It's all about speed.
And they're not going to wait.
They need to learn to share.
What do you bowl up at breakfast time?
Thinking a little bit out of the box on this one.
This is a process of evolution.
I still feel a bit like a guinea pig.
Our audience has changed, and there's a whole new audience out there, and technology has given us a new audience. It's a generational change has changed the audience. So while our newspaper print circulations have held up really well, we now have a massive new audience in a digital sphere. It's absolutely necessary that to be really coherent in the way we present news, online and print need to work closely together, merge to a certain extent, to really attack the news agenda on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis.
My understanding of convergence or integration really is about that you have one news gathering operation, and then you decide how you're going to distribute that news and information that you've gathered, and whether that be in print, whether that be via the web, whether it be via mobile or some other medium yet to come.
Convergence in the newsroom is something that we at Fairfax are trying to achieve. It's a goal that I think every newspaper and media organisation in the world is looking at. The election site was one of the projects that we've been using as sort of like a vanguard project to push that through. I think the ultimate aim is to try and flatten out the walls that are between us.
Hopefully in the future, a very smooth transition to a situation where there is no division between the online Sydney Morning Herald and its staff and the newspaper Sydney Morning Herald and its staff. Reporters will be working both sides of the fence.
And a big part of that has actually been getting an online chief of staff, which means we've got someone who can liaise between the paper and the web. So he knows what's going on both sides. That's Jeff Spencer.
I was given the task of putting together the website for the election campaign. Partly production and partly commissioning of stories and coordination of various things across platforms, and also talking to the newspaper side about what they were doing.
The online chief of staff, my counterpart on the online side of things, Jeff Spencer, would come in slightly earlier than I would and would be already dispatching his online reporters out into the field to cover whatever the candidates were doing. When I come into the office, I'll get a download from him. I could log on to smh.com, have a look at what they were already filing, and then go from there, dealing with daily news lists, deciding what was making a story and what wasn't, news editing the 2 pages of the Sydney Morning Herald that we devoted to coverage of the campaign.
There's always going to be an issue about what news should appear on the web and what news should appear in the newspaper.
Where does the news cycle start and finish? I mean, does it start with that morning's paper, or does it finish with that morning's paper?
It gets tossed on people's lawns at 6 a.m. And it contains the best of everything that's happened in the previous 24 hours. The website can publish every 30 seconds.
Breaking news. We have to be fast with getting stuff out.
If somebody tells me at 10 a.m. that, this is a big story, X is happening, I can hold it for the paper, but we need to be aware of, but other people are going to get it, and by the time, other websites going to get it, and is it going to be on the 6 p.m. news? By the time the paper gets out tomorrow, is it already going to have perished in terms of a scoop, us breaking it?
That decision was made primarily on the basis of whether or not we had an exclusive story that we should probably hold for the newspaper, or whether it was a story that was breaking for everybody during the day, and therefore we should put our resources into covering it online.
So I was there to make sure that the web was getting enough content during the day. Most of our audience is between about, maybe 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. And that, if something big happened, I could make sure that it was up on the web immediately.
A lot of the things that happen in a New South Wales election happen on radio. So we were monitoring those very closely. That's where you're getting comments from the opposition leader, getting comments from the Premier and from very senior ministers. A lot of that was agenda setting for the rest of the day.
The online journalist will go out and break a story at 8:30 in the morning, and later on a print reporter will work on that story and extend it and take it further for the print edition. And you could call that a form of story building.
Our standard day usually involved going to the press conference in the morning, asking questions.
Premier, you've talked about better services and you've talked about delivering on your promises, but the bottom line is you've promised very little in this campaign in terms of new money, and most of what you have promised we're getting about 2011. So it's really a bit of spin, isn't it?
Well, the point is this.
Morris Yema might announce something, and that would be the internet story, but people criticising that announcement would be the newspaper story, or maybe different things that Yema was asked about would end up being the newspaper story. Or even in some cases, the internet story that we wrote never found its way into the newspaper. The press corps essentially said to Yema at his morning announcement, we want you to go a street walk this last day before the election and actually meet some, quote, real people.
Walks can be dangerous because you get somebody who really hates the Labor Party and they can come along and slag them off.
Please make sure that one hasn't got poison on it.
But he went into this sandwich shop, bought a sandwich, and unfortunately for him, this shop assistant said, I saw on the news last night that you were trained by that criminal guy. She meant Graham Richardson, who of course I should point out is not a criminal for libel reasons, but it was quite a funny moment, unscripted, embarrassed him, made people remember his background and who trained him. We were able to use the time travelling back in the car to file a story for the internet. Right, here we go. This is working. I needed to turn the phone on. Cannot connect. Unfortunately, on that day, we had a sending problem, some technology problem. I have to call for help here. Yeah. Can they give me a call pretty soon? Because I'm about to throw this thing out the window. Okay, thank you.
The thing that we trialled during the election campaign was this new PDA called the Jazz Jams. Probably difficult for a lot of reporters to come to grips with, but I think over time when they become more used to it, that we'll have more possibilities in it.
Even though the mobile phone was on in the Jazz Jam, it didn't send for a while. But the main thing is we got it through, and we got it through fairly quickly.
Andrew's just filed by his Jazz Jam, and I've looked it up on the thing we call Nomad, which is just a queue of stories that come in from outside. Stories and also pictures can come through this. So we open up his story. And there it is. So we've got the story, this is the photograph.
I knew that we had to get this legal, and so rather than just put it up on the net, I said, can we legal this? The lawyer didn't approve the use of the word criminal. I then had to go back in the office and find another set of words and get it past the lawyer.
Traditional ways of news gathering have to be maintained. First and foremost, our stuff is accurate, is fair, that we have the traditional news judgment doesn't go out the window simply because we're trying to get up there quickly.
There's no question that with the internet, the capacity for error and for legal problems is far greater. I suppose you'd most closely align it to radio bulletins, but radio bulletins are on the hour. There's no on the hour deadline here. You just have to file it as fast as you can.
I think the single biggest challenge for us as newspaper journalists was working out whether immediately after a news conference we rushed off and filed to the internet, or whether we grabbed the minister before he left the press conference and just asked a few more questions. I think that's going to be something we're going to have to wrestle with over the next year or so.
I'm never going to remember that. How do I rename it? I can't figure out. It's just lost the connection.
I'm not a huge tech head either, to be honest, and when I first started using the PDAs, I had to get a bit of training on it.
In one way, they're like a mini laptop. In other ways, they've also got an audio capacity and they've got a video capacity, and they can take still images as well.
I can actually, with the fold-out keyboard and the Jazz Jam, I can just sit down and I can listen to quotes I've got or look at my shorthand and write it straight in and send it straight back to this server here. And then I can just ring my editor and say the story's there. He can open it up, pick it up, whack it up, and fix it up if he needs to.
They were good in that you could check your copy and have it nice and neat, but you had to find a place to use it, get it set up, and it was probably slower, five minutes or so slower than just filing down the phone.
How manageable it is in a car or an airplane, something that's moving, how big the keyboard is it a bit unwieldy, editing software so that you can edit a video or audio file really easily and send something much quicker and more easily.
It's not, necessarily completely a plug-and-play thing where you can just pick it up and use it, but, it just takes a bit of training and we're not quite there yet, but when we get Outlook on the Jazz Jam, that's going to be great because then I have all my contacts in my Outlook account. And that means I've got all my contacts in the Jazz Jam. I don't need to, because at the moment I print it out and I take it with me. That it also means I can be checking my stories during the day, make sure that my story's been put up correctly, there's no issues with it, or just, whether they've added AAP copy to it because the story's moved on. With the Jazz Jam, I can surf the web and I can check that.
These things, they're big. The big win factor for them is for the photographers or people that have to send big files. I wanted something really lightweight for the bushfires, so I didn't have to go back to a car and not watch what was going on, which is dangerous. The pictures I'll be sending back for the net, they're going to be tight sort of images and very obvious because they're going to be shown on a very small space. I take the SD card out of my camera, I put it into the PDA, and then hopefully if the program's working, it's still a bit buggy, this version of it, it'll open up, I convert it to JPEG, downsize it, and get it back to the office. I've just delivered one picture now. It took me about 2 or 3 minutes. The guy in the yellow behind me is a radio journo, and radio has been, almost live and the first to file. But now I've got megabytes of images and I've filed before him.
If I'm out in the story and I need to find out some information, I can just use the Jazz Jam to look on the web, Google it, go back through old stories. So it's an incredible tool like that, and it's got to become really, really fundamental to, I think, the tools that we use.
I suspect, though, the real thing is about our work practices, about whether we spend our time taking notes and listening and asking questions versus filming, and which obviously is an activity that takes a whole lot of concentration as well. So I'm not sure that the idea of the multimedia journalist with a tape recorder, camera, video and a notebook is realistic.
What does integration mean? Does it mean more work? Does it interrupt the workflow in terms of developing content for the paper? And I guess the internet and other digital forms have been kind of scary for traditional newspaper journalists.
Thinking about where journalists and journalism are going in the next 10 to 15 years, it comes back down to the most basic kind of journalistic values. It's about the story. It's about being in the right place at the right time, knowing enough about the story to ask the right questions and knowing how to put that into context for an audience. When you look at it like that, the actual way in which that story is delivered and that story is told is less important than having the journalistic skill to recognise the story and to see the best way to put that out to the audience. What that will mean is that journalists will have to be able to do pieces to camera. They will have to be able to write stories for text for production online. They may have to be able to write both breaking news and analysis pieces.
If not now, then definitely in the future. Journalists, I think, will be expected to be multi-skilled in many ways, and multi-skilled in the sense that you can actually stand up in front of a camera.
One of the things which I must say I got to enjoy a bit better once I got a bit more skilled at it was doing pieces to camera. That involved, I discovered, writing a little script, going down to the studio, probably doing 2 or 3 takes because we're not very good at it yet. And then the online people would work their magic, and there it would be on the site. The main theme of the week will be who's best to manage the $320 billion New South Wales economy.
The skills that some of the more senior journalists who are used to working in a paper environment have, the skills that they have, are not necessarily directly translatable into a video environment. And I think it was an interesting experience for the senior journalistic staff who came down and did those pieces to cameras and those issues-based wraps for us to experience what that was like.
It looks terrible.
To learn that the words that they wrote, which were beautiful to read as written text, were quite difficult to say sometimes, and that the style of presentation they needed was something which perhaps they needed to have a bit of coaching in order to feel comfortable in that environment.
I want to do that part again. Can I do it again?
That's the thing. It's just you're just looking very wooden, you know. If you look at the police,
You bastard.
So you want to just listen up and go.
Let me give it a go.
Give it a crack anyway.
How'd you do it again? Do it again.
I won't be able to tell you each word, but it's like you're talking to
Do it how you did it though.
The
Like,
first sentence.
when it comes to law and order, this election is... all right, okay. The government has matched this with a promise to increase the force by 750. Peter Debnam says he will hire the extra police from...
Video production's actually been going on in Fairfax for 5 or 6 years. It's happened at a relatively low level and without a great deal of linkage through to material appearing either in the papers or in the online mastheads. In the middle of last year, there was a dramatic increase in the number of staff that were hired on and a change in emphasis away from material which was more lifestyle and backgrounder into a much more breaking news agenda. As a result, we sent more people out on, more of our staff who are producers out onto the road to gather stories. The way we did this during the recent election was that the video team stayed very closely in contact with the editorial team. Every day there were several discussions about which stories to cover, which ones would be the most important stories, what the logistics were of getting people out there. Sometimes there were several people from different parts of the organisation covering it, sometimes there would only be one. It very much was driven by the logistics and by decisions being made about the best way to cover that particular story. The growth of video downloads from our website is huge. We've already passed 3 million downloads a month across all of our websites at Fairfax. It's rising steeply. So when we get true broadband, true fast download, then it's going to change the nature. We're a newspaper and now we're a video company as well, and this is amazing. One of the great advantages of working in a place like Fairfax is that it's got a very deep store of journalistic material and additional visual material which we can lever into a video story. There's a common misconception that the video that we need to put on the web has to be the same as TV. Some of our highest rating stories have been stories which have basically had a journalistic overlay and nothing but stills in the background. By having those stills and having the skills of the snappers out there being able to send material in really quickly, we are able to basically assemble stories back at the base where we wouldn't be able to get people out onto that location because we're stretched for resources. We're also able to put stories together really quickly because if we have people out on the road, we have to get that material back in, whereas we can get material quite quickly in from the snappers. And we did that quite a lot during the election. Some of the stories were difficult to tell in video because we had to keep a camera, for example, rolling on the talking head of the politician. However, the photographers are able to be much more mobile, and so they would often get much more visually striking shots than we could get on the video. And by mixing those two together, you can get a really quite powerful and compelling presentation.
When I started, we went from black and white to colour. We went from a dark room to computers. And then in '98, I was one of the first guys to grab digital. And for me, it's always been an opportunity.
A photographer might go out to a job for a newspaper, take 20 images. They might get a picture in the paper if they're lucky, simply because of space. Well, online there's no constrictions to that, so often we can use multiple images.
I don't really see myself as working for the paper or online, or necessarily both. I see myself working for photography and storytelling, and then there's different formats that suit that better. So when I approach a assignment, you might be thinking this will make a great page in the newspaper, but it also might make a great multimedia presentation. So all that's, the convergence is actually going on the job.
One thing that we're using quite extensively now is sound slides, and these are beyond the traditional, what people know as photo galleries. We have them now as rolling images, and they roll through with audio over them. There's no other medium does it. Television doesn't do it, obviously radio doesn't do it, and newspapers don't do it. This is something that's quite unique to the web.
There's very few people that have the necessary skills at the moment to present stuff well. We have an army of sub-editors and designers that make the paper look fantastic. And I would love to see that side of the website grow. We need time to explore new forms of working. We need some research and development funding to come through for us to experiment. It's been really difficult for us as photographers to grow. We're busting to contribute, and sadly that hasn't been matched with the same level of enthusiasm from the company thus far. So it's been a little disappointing, but that's human nature, and I think over time that will evolve, and the quality of work coming through, I think, is winning a lot of people over.
there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people out there who have cameras with them and who have a communication device with them in a mobile phone with a camera on it. All of the users of our site and readers of the Herald who have a mobile phone are able to send material through to us. We've got some very good examples over the last year or so of material being sent through, which has been material we could not have gathered otherwise.
It's very important, I think, is to try and get our readers to understand that they can contribute to the news process, that they're part of it. And I think that interactivity and that contribution that they make makes them even stronger in their loyalty to the various products that we're putting out.
But that's the value of these tip-offs, it's fantastic. None of the press corps who was with him on the trip thought it was significant, but this sort of thing has sparked as a potential story. So
we can get people's responses almost immediately to big stories, to big issues of the moment.
Well, during the election campaign, there was one particularly embarrassing moment for the Emma government when a train broke down on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. People were stuck on the train for 3 hours. They were let off and they had to walk through these old 1930s built tunnels, fumble their way through the dark, and people were taking images of their ordeal, which is a brand new way of looking at news.
We get probably on average, probably over 100 at least emails a day from people saying, I've got this, or did you know about this angle from this story, or have you heard that this person did that? We get a lot of stuff out of Scoop, and so do the paper reporters.
With that comes questions of accuracy and veracity, of course.
But often the compelling nature of the event, be it a lightning strike or a car on fire, those things often, you believe them when you see them.
The other thing that we can tap into in an interactive way is the use of reader feedback through things like polls. We'll place this little pointer in the newspaper at the end of the story that we're going to print in tomorrow's newspaper, so we can get some reader reaction to it online. So it's the two platforms, it's the online and the newspaper sort of feeding off one another. Then we also have a thing called Have Your Say, which is an online forum, and we pose a question and we ask people for their opinions about certain issues.
And if you've got 4 or 5 stories with log on to our forum online on it, we can monitor very easily what stories are really resonating with the readership.
So they know, or we like to think that they know, that they can come to the Sydney Morning Herald in any format it's in, print and online, and we will go out there, make sense of the world for them, package it, present it to them, and engage them in that process at the same time.
The state election was a real opportunity for us to do something quite different in terms of our overall coverage, to really utilise the web for the first time during an election campaign, to really sort of test just how far we've integrated the newsroom.
I think we did well on most counts. I think we could improve on others.
There are certain things which can be improved, and we were the first trial of it, really. So, there are some interesting and exciting times ahead, I guess.
We're going to see more and more convergence. We're going to see a morphing of the traditional media environments, so there will be very little difference between a newspaper company, a television company, a radio company.
It will constantly evolve, and I think it's a matter of not getting too hung up on that, but remaining at our core, which is telling stories effectively with great emotion and with great accuracy.
Decisions about how to treat stories will be taken by the news editors, thinking about all the platforms that we have to deliver news and content on, deciding which is the best one to use at any given time and how's the best way to play that particular story on that particular medium.
I'm now confident that we have the beginnings of the skill set that we're going to need to make that transformation from a newspaper organisation to a genuine news media, a news organisation that uses many different distribution channels. That was pleasing to realise that we have both the talent and the enthusiasm to pull that off.
Documentary maker.
Shane?
He's
How you going?
David Kirk's ordered an in-house doco be made on how we cover the state election campaign, trying to showcase the work processes of the future.
Can I purchase the unedited edition?
It's more that Kirk decided to short through.
You will be sit down, grab your eyeballs, have your eyes prized open and be forced to watch.
What's the working title? Great Cures for Insomnia?
Something's wrong. Can you stop this? This is really freaking me out.